compensation study that the Police Foundation did came to us in June. It showed that we were paying our officers about 30% less than what we should be, based on departments around the region and peer cities across the country. Mayor Bottoms made an announcement in October that over 3 kind of phases, one that took place in December, the second that'll take place this June, and the third that'll take place in June of 2020, we're actually raising police pay by 30%. Part of that is because we're about 450 officers short. We have been for a long time. You can see it in response times, if people do respond. You can see it in how stressed our officers have been. We just went through a beat alignment that took effect on March 14th. We shrunk Zone 2, which was one of 6 zones, but about a third of the city, to try and make sure that we've evenly displaced our officers based on the number of calls that they get. And so hopefully managing their workload mixed with raising their pay by 30% over about 18 months will help us retain folks. We have a bad history of investing a whole lot of time and money in officers, and they're with us for 2 or 3 years, and then they go to Cobb County where they were making more money in a less stressful environment. Made a lot of green space progress in 2018. We acquired the Southeast Trail, that if you go to kind of Memorial and Glenwood, you can walk all the way to the West Side Trail now on an interim trail that will become more permanent over time. We broke ground on the new West Side Park. It's 280 acres. It's about 100 acres larger than Piedmont Park. Hopefully over time it will take some of the festivals that Abby loves to provide some relief.
I do love them.
I do too. Nothing
If
like a
managed
festival.
properly.
That's right, indeed. Open Proctor Creek Greenway. If you go to the Bankhead MARTA station, you will walk right onto a greenway, the first phase of which is 3 miles. It will eventually stretch all the way to the Chattahoochee River. So you'll be able to go from the Beltline down a greenway to the Chattahoochee River, which we also introduced the Chattahoochee River study last year. The city is working in partnership with Cobb County, who hopefully won't be stealing our police officers anymore, and the Atlanta Regional Commission to study about a 100-mile stretch of the Chattahoochee River, which we unfortunately stuck a whole bunch of industrial stuff next to over the last 30 or 40 years. A lot of concrete plants and truck centers. There are parts of it that are beautiful and there are parts of it that are not. And so we're going to be working with those other entities to try and figure out how we can kind of reclaim our river and make it a place where people will want to travel down that greenway once it is finished. I used to serve on the school board. The city and the school system fought a lot during my 4 years on the board. That relationship is not fixed, but it's getting better. Part of that was Mayor Reed refused to hand over 55 deeds to APS buildings all across the city. We sued. Mayor Bottoms came into office, and the first thing she did was hand over the 31 that were ready to go. And over the last 7 or 8 months, there's been a steady stream as we've worked out issues with parks, land park lines, and HUD, and all the different people that we've needed approval from, so that we can check that off our list and move on to having a more productive conversation with the school system. No conversation about City Hall is complete unless we're talking about ethics and transparency. A lot of the legislation we have approved this year has been reactive, whether it's rules on credit card usage, whether it's been how you can or can't give bonuses, Christmas sweater parties, strongly advised against. Felicia Moore has led on 2 things that I think are really important. One is our independent audit office is now reviewing every procurement over $1 million. We did a pilot to make sure that wasn't going to slow down an already slow procurement process, and that came back really favorably. And the second is that while we have an audit office that can go look at things and tell us where we think we have erred and how we could fix it, and while we have an ethics office that tells us when people have violated the ethics code, we didn't really have a compliance function. So once the auditor said something is wrong, we got a report, and that was it. And so Felicia spearheaded, and Jennifer Ide, the councilwoman for District 6, actually ran the legislation to create, to expand the Office of Ethics to be ethics and compliance. It will have an additional funding stream on July 1st and an additional person who will lead a team to make sure that the things that have been plaguing city government for the last 2 or 3 years hopefully won't happen in the future, saving us a whole lot of money in legal bills, if nothing else, in the process. kind of now moving forward, the General Assembly mercifully adjourned on April 2nd after doing what they do best. One of those things was making a pretty aggressive attempt at our airport. City of Atlanta started Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport 94 years ago. It has owned and operated it ever since. It's the largest economic engine in the Southeast. It's a $63 billion economic impact. 50,000 jobs are directly tied to the airport. We give out hundreds of millions of dollars worth of contracts, over a time period for construction and parking and concessions. Over the last 20 or 30 years, we'll add that we do that while maintaining somewhere between 33 and 38% minority participation in those contracts. And the state covers somewhere between 1 and 2%. There have been attempts to take control over the last 20 years. This was the one that got the furthest. Made it out of the Senate. Senator Burt Jones from Jackson has been pushing very, very hard for reasons that I don't fully understand. It met a wall in the House. Georgia House Speaker Ralston had no interest at all in taking over the airport. He said he had enough stuff to run. But we've been plagued by some ethics issues that have made that more of a conversation than it should be. So we avoided that this past session. I have no doubt that it'll come back at least a little bit in 2020. And so it's on us to spend the next 9 months showing that we run a tight, clean, efficient, transparent airport as well as every other department in city government, so that there's no rational explanation for them to want to do that again in the future. ADOT. All right, so Andre Dickens, who has been on council for 5 years, has spent the last 2 years pushing. We've got an Office of Transportation. It sits in the Department of Public Works. We have an Office of Transportation Mobility that sits in the Office of Planning under Tim Keene. And then in 2015 and 2016, we created Renew Atlanta and the T-SPOST funding streams, which also sit in their own silo. And one of the things that became clear to Andre over the last couple of years and to me over the last 12 months is that, like all great governments, when people are in silos and there's a lot of bureaucracy, it's just clunky and it doesn't work well at all. Dre introduced a piece of legislation at our March 15th meeting that would bring all of those different silos under one bucket, right? So we're not out to create a giant new department. We're just trying to bring people who are in different places under one really awesome leader to hire a commissioner of transportation who can work with someone like Tim Keene in realizing the vision that is laid out in the Atlanta Transportation Plan or Atlanta City Design and all of these plans that we have that have never really been fully realized yet. Part of that is Renew and T-SPOST. The 45-second answer to a 4-year problem is that in 2015 and 2016, the city went to Atlanta residents and promised what has turned out to be about $940 million worth of promises. Complete streets all over the place, signalization, green space expansion, greenways, a lot of stuff, and we've got about $500 million to fulfill those $940 million worth of promises. So we have spent the last 4 or 5 months on a apology tour of sorts in community meetings in different quadrants around the city. Those are always a lot of fun to stand up and speak at. But I have found that honesty is a good policy, and you just gotta say a whole bunch of promises were made, and the funding that was initially allocated for projects, it was $3 million for the complete street on Monroe and Boulevard, or $7 million for a complete street on DeKalb. And if you really cost out what it would take to do those things well, it's 2 and 3 times that. And so it is true that we built a $27 million bridge over Northside Drive. It makes me angry every time I drive under it. And it's true that we spent $10 million on expanding Piedmont Park, and it came out of a bucket from T-SPOST. And at the time, a year ago, this is going to be $10 million out of a $40 million partnership bucket. And by November, it became, whoa, we're $400 million short on all of the projects that we want to fund. What that has led to is Many projects are getting done and will get done over the next 2 or 3 years, and many won't, right? So whereas we will be moving forward, we're gonna be voting on Monday on a resolution that we don't actually have to vote on. The legislation in 15 and 16 left all of these decisions in the hands of the mayor. But her team, well, he at the time, Keisha's team, led by a really solid guy named Josh Williams, who's the deputy COO and is gonna be taking over as COO. We've had a conversation about how we need to own what we're committing to do over the next 2 or 3 years and what we're saying we can't do over the next 2 or 3 years. So things like complete streets on Monroe and Boulevard or Howell Mill and Fifth Street are gonna get done. Complete streets on DeKalb Avenue and all of Cascade and Campbellton Road are not gonna get done in this phase. We've got a lot of money, less than some people want, more than other people want, in resurfacing. There are a number of streets that I've jotted down that are kind of in our immediate area. I'm happy to read those off to you. But we have tried to balance taking corridors that are heavily trafficked and dangerous and making them safe for people in cars and on foot and on bike and on scooters, with the realization that a lot of people still use cars and our roads suck. And so we've got to try to find and strike that balance. I think we have done a good job on the presentation that we're going to vote on Monday, and we've got to execute before we ever have a conversation with people about wanting to extend a sales tax, given our track record thus far. Almost done, because I used to teach and people lose interest after a while. The FY20 budget, our new budget cycle, will start on July 1st. Last year, we made, before the giant police pay raises, we did a 3.1% raise for all police and firefighters. The city is on a 3-year trajectory of raising our minimum wage to $15 an hour. We will get there on July 1st, so every city employee will make at least $15 an hour, which actually you can't live on by yourself in any zip code in Atlanta, but we're making progress compared to what it used to be. We made a small but first time investment in HIV. Atlanta and Fulton County are ground zero for an HIV epidemic in Georgia. It's by and large the county's responsibility, but the mayor felt like she wanted to make a symbolic contribution, and we were happy to do that with her. We spent some money on cyber stuff so we don't ever get crippled by a cyber attack like we did last March. We were having some trouble picking up people's trash and yard trimmings because all of our trucks were breaking down at the same time, because we tend to buy all of our trucks and then like use them until they literally fall apart and then buy a bunch of new ones again, and like we're on this 12-year cycle that doesn't really make any sense. We should be buying trucks every 3 or 4 years, which JP Mazikite is very big on making sure we fix. And potholes. Mayor is fond of saying we filled 18,000 potholes since she took office. I swear, I feel like I drive on 18,000 more. Getting here, coming up Peachtree, it's a nightmare. Peachtree is on the list of streets that is said to be repaved, along with many others. So, I'll stop there. I guess the last thing is I look out behind you. It's been 30 years since the city did its last tree ordinance rewrite. We had a couple false starts in 2011 and 2014. We are gearing up for another one. 47% of our city is tree canopy. That is incredible. The vast majority of those trees sit on private single-family residential units. And so it's a very delicate balance of how do you preserve the trees we have, how do you try and get to the goal that has been set of 50% tree canopy, while we see a lot of buildings like this going up everywhere, and people who live at a home who want to take down a tree that they think is a danger to them, but we have a very cumbersome process. But you can also level other pieces of property so long as you're willing to pay money into a fund. So stay tuned for that conversation over the next 3 or 4 months, and any thoughts you have on that or anything else would be welcome. So, all right, I'm done. What you got?
You want to read those streets to us? Is going to be written?
Sure. So, kind of in order, the Midtown CID, Midtown Alliance, has been working with the city on sidewalk repairs. I don't have a figure for how much money we're putting into that, but the two of us are chipping in to do those. Complete streets will take place on 5th, Howell Mill, Monroe, Boulevard, Piedmont Avenue, The 10th Street Bridge will become a lot more like the 5th Street Bridge for those folks who
Yeah.
make the trek between Georgia Tech and Tech Square. 15th Street, the Midtown Alliance is funding all by themselves, but it's part of this, an extension of 15th Street so that we can help with traffic kind of in North Midtown. Resurfacing 8th Street, 10th Street, part of 14th Street, North Avenue, Montgomery Ferry, Spring, Peachtree Street, Peachtree Road. There are a number of signalization projects, hundreds happening all across the city, including several in Midtown. What's not happening yet, DeKalb Avenue is going to be designed, but will not be done entirely. Same with North Avenue, and same with Spring and West Peachtree. Those were tough for me to see, like all the other streets that are tough. Here in Midtown, we've worked really closely with Kevin at the Alliance to try and make West Peachtree and Spring better for those of us who live here and the many more who work here. So they'll be designed to look great one day, but will not have the $8 and $6 million respectively to finish that. Cheshire Bridge was supposed to get a whole lot better, and we're pulling back in part because of how much construction's going on that road right now. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to invest stuff on the street if you're gonna continue to tear it up as it transforms as quickly as it is, but one day we will need to do that. And then Lindbergh used to be on a repaving list, but isn't anymore.
What's the timeline for all that?
Yeah, we're gonna vote on Monday. The two revenue streams, there's $250 million in bonds, the Renew Atlanta bonds that we voted on as a public in March of 2015. That money has largely been spent down on different projects, but there is some left. The T-Splosh that we voted on in November of 16 that took effect in March of 17 generates, we get money every month, but we get a certain, it's 0.4 of a penny. The penny at APS generates about $90 million a year, and so 0.4 of a penny will generate, I made a C- in math in college, but less than $90 million a year. And so we get, I know, good old Grady High School.
That was Princeton.
So we,
I'm MIT, about 40 million.
the funding stream, we get money every month from March of 17 until March of 22. Same bucket, and so we've got to stagger our projects based on the funding that we have, but everything I just read to you will be done by the spring of 2022. Will be done. I'll say will. Yes, sir.
I do the license and permits with Midtown Neighborhood Association. How do we keep from getting inaccurate liquor license applications?
Keep from getting inaccurate.
Explain that a little
Yeah.
bit.
I mean, some of the applications say they're 24/7 serving alcohol, which is illegal, some of them, there's just different things. I mean, some you could consider minor, but
Yeah.
if it's coming out of the city that they okay it and they send it to us,
And it's things like,
And they
it means they can do it.
okay,
And then same thing as far as like the management and then,
yeah.
making sure that the city knows how many bars they might have.
Or how many gas stations on 14th
Per
Street.
bar, they're not in line of sight of each other,
Yeah.
but they might just make one bar and have 2 or 3 bars. So that you're gonna find it's gonna make us more money.
Yeah. Yep, no, that's, I had Kathy, and I were talking earlier this year and last year about distances between gas stations, and I learned through that process that we take the person requesting the permit at their word, that they've done the distance stuff.
But they lie.
And then when they lie, cops can choose to go out and measure it themselves, but they don't have to.
Right, yeah, typically though.
And when the body makes a decision, the next thing to do is to sue, right? So, received. I don't have a solution for you, but it's a problem in need of a solution, and she might have part of
And
one
I
as
do
well.
have, I'm gonna add to that,
Yeah.
cause I had a conversation with the new lieutenant at LNP yesterday about that same stupid gas station.
Yeah.
And basically, the ordinance needs to be, nobody's following the ordinance, and they're leaving it to the personal judgment of the police. And I did talk to Major Sherman, we had coffee a couple mornings ago, I laid it all out to him. He did say it's a very small, they're like overworked. I says, well, I mean, they may be overworked, but they're not following the ordinance, but I also think the ordinance needs to be reviewed by city council, and they need to tighten it up, because they leave a lot of loopholes for these businesses. And it seems like the police always just, they let the business get the license anyway in violation of whatever the ordinance says.
Yeah, okay. All right, so I got 2 people for the task force to rewrite the ordinance.
I'll say,
We'll help you with that.
we've talked about it in this group as well as, you know, is this the next thing that we wanna take up, because it has to do with, you know, the permitting, like down from the permitting side, like if we say no, if everyone says no, they still get approved, even if they've, you know, violated tons of things. And we had an example, it was pretty shocking that occurred. So you're seeing the end of that, because that's similar to what we saw with the noise ordinance, is that, hey, how come I can have the police out 30 times for this, like, and they don't wanna write a ticket? It's because they don't have enough teeth to write it and they lose in court. So, you know, that's something that we'll probably engage in and talk about, but that's kind of, I think, the big stem of what, you know, we have here and what's something that we can have a pretty big effect on, so.
Okay.
I have not such a quick question, but you were working with some of our group from the Office of Transportation side of it on the complimentary valet parking. Now, there's 2 sorts of valet parking. One is park for hire, which is legislated. The complimentary seems to be this nebulous
Loophole thing.
loophole thing that somebody came up with. So anyway, we did an open records request, and the City Attorney Virginia Robinson is advising the Office of Transportation to allow these non-compliant type of operations, these complimentary ones. It's not legislated. They do take a fee from the restaurant or bar or nightclub, whatever that is. They're not insurance verified. They're not taxed. Anyway, so do you have an update on that?
Yeah. Are you reading someone? wrote
Jimmy
me about
Gentry,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, in the last
Yeah.
week or 2. I took his email, I forwarded it to the city attorney.
I know. Well,
This is a good reminder that I don't think she's responded.
She doesn't
No,
respond.
okay. Let's just talk about city attorneys now. You have to do an open records request to even talk to anybody. So we're trying to get for license and permits, we're trying to get a meeting with the city and also APD, and they're saying, well, we've elevated to the city attorneys. Well, that's basically just saying go away.
Yep.
So I'm like, okay, well,
So-
when are you gonna have an
so
answer?
the city, I can't speak to every city, every attorney in the law department, largely because many of them are new. I have faith and confidence in Nina Hickson, and so when I have approached Nina on something, I have found her to be
write
responsive
that down.
and collaborative. So I will set up a meeting with me and Nina Hickson.
Everybody be calling Nina.
Okay. All right. Poor Nina's gonna get inundated right now.
We all signed up to do this.
Here's a Midtown, will you guys be finding the trucks that park in the back lane?
We got a lot of, yeah, so,
Good luck.
yeah. One of the things, and someone in this room may have had a conversation with Amir or Jen more recently than I have.
No.
No? Okay. All right. So I've learned, one of the things I've learned as a citywide rep is you don't step on district people's toes. So I'm not stepping on Jen or Amir's toes on this issue. I know they talk about it together because it impacts their districts. And so I will get an update from them on where they are, and then I will share with Nick, and he can share with the group. Yes, sir, and then over here.
Well, I have some scooter concerns.
Oh, yeah.
There seems to have been an inundation of the amount of scooters that are in our neighborhood residential area, and it's one of the areas where some of the sidewalks are narrow anyway because of older trees, and
Yeah.
they're really not supposed to be on the sidewalks.
Yep.
As well as on the belt line, the number, and Bowman kind of been tracking the number, because if you make pictures and you report it, it does nothing except it quells his anger. But what they do, if you report it, is they give you free minutes to ride them, which we would never do anyway. So that's awesome.
Oh, that is
It's
great.
reported. And,
So you can get on the
to
sidewalk.
me, I guess it just seems more of a safety issue at this point with pedestrians.
Yeah.
And in fact, we were very good friends with a retired county auditor in Clark County, and he was visiting Atlanta, stayed downtown for a conference this week,
Yeah.
and he was just perplexed.
Sure. Well, they're banned in Athens, so that's
Right,
why
right,
it'd be
that's what he
replaced.
said. He
Yeah.
said, no, that didn't even make it 6 months in Athens, being one of the poorest counties in the state, the smallest county in the state, and they were able to rectify it almost initially. And then it's just getting worse by
Yeah,
the
it's
day. with
horrible.
the scooters
It's getting
getting
worse.
real
It's
high.
terrible.
So I wanted to kind
Particularly when you
of
have a
know where
festival.
y'all stood
Yeah.
on that.
Yep.
They're all coming from Mardo.
So a little bit of background, scooters showed up kind of literally overnight. Bird, I think, was the first back in mid-May. In true government fashion, we passed our legislation like 7 months later, at the first meeting in January, I think. So I think a couple things. One, I think scooters can be a net benefit to the city. I think they get people out of cars. I myself took a scooter from City Hall to the World Congress Center a couple days ago last night. I took it from the High Regency back to my place at 12th and Piedmont in the street, because one time I rode on the sidewalk and someone took a picture of me and put it on Twitter. So, you know, it's interesting, as I was driving up Peachtree, it was like 10:15, I went up Peachtree, I turned right on 10th, I heard the music, it was so cool, I thought of Dana. And I was in the right lane, and at my first I felt guilty. I was like, I'm in this lane, I'm, you know, slowing down traffic. And I was like, you know what? No, I'm in this lane. I'm slowing down traffic. That's okay. Everybody's gonna be fine. And so I had a little bit of a, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world to have these things be in streets. I felt our streets are really dangerous places to be. The sidewalk is not where they should be at all. You know, the companies, when I reached out to Bird and Uber and Lyft and Lime and pointed out places where they are setting them up improperly, they have gone and fixed it. But that doesn't mean that the first person who gets on it at 9 a.m. and then rides it half a mile and puts it in the middle of a sidewalk. So one is that, and other than, I noticed when I was taking a picture of the one last night after my ride, it actually, I thought you had to take a picture showing it was not in the middle of the sidewalk for the ride to actually stop. But the ride actually stops before, and the picture is just a thing that I think encourages you to not park it in the middle of the sidewalk. And so I had the thought last night of maybe we can talk to the companies about mandating that be how you turn your ride off, is that you have to show you're not in the middle of the sidewalk. On the number of them, I agree, they're getting a little out of control. We didn't set a cap in January, but we said we're gonna come back in 6 months, and the four of you are gonna tell us how many scooters you have and how many rides each scooter is getting. And in the first week of July, we're gonna have a conversation about cutting the number. Once we actually have data, because there are too many.
Could you ask them to give you that data by zone, so that
Yep.
you don't do it citywide, and then you can look at the isolated areas?
Yep, that was the other thing, one of the things we made them do in the legislation was that they were, when they first came, they were almost entirely in Midtown and downtown. And we said, because I think as a citywide rep, I see people on scooters who don't have access to cars. And so I think that is a way for people to get around if you like a car and you're trying to get to a MARTA station or to somewhere nearby. So there are pieces of the puzzle that are positive, but there are pieces that need to be fixed. I hear that. Yes, ma'am.
What does the Bird and the other entities pay the city to allow them to put their scooters on our streets?
Yep. There's I don't have either fee off the top of my head. There's a registration fee that each company has to pay. And then there's a per device fee. And when I send you a note with the Midtown Music Update and the complimentary valet meeting time, I'll send that out as well.
Is that ongoing? So every month they pay you for however many devices are used, or is it just as
A
they get
one-time
the
thing.
device?
I think it's the latter.
The latter,
I think it's
okay,
the
one
latter.
time, all right.
I remember reading what it was, I don't remember, but it seemed wholly not enough for me. And my other statement is about where they're allowed to go.
Yeah.
Currently, are they allowed on the Beltline and Piedmont Park?
Yeah.
That should be something you should look at, because they can go up to 12 miles an hour.
Yep.
The little scooters that work just like them can go up to 30 miles an hour. I've seen them on a Beltline. They might kill somebody at 30 miles an hour, a pedestrian.
Yeah.
Or injure them. So I think beyond the legislation the city passed, of at least getting some money from them, it seemed like wholly not enough. Where's the legislation on the park and the Beltline?
Yep.
And it's a great idea for millennials to not get any exercise. Why should you walk?
Hey, Matt's a millennial, be careful.
So that's fair.
And you won't end up on Twitter with that.
I guess after my two 420s last night at the Hyatt Regency, I probably should have walked home. Touche.
I wasn't coming.
I know.
I have a suggestion that in streets that are really like the narrow ones, maybe people should walk the streets and have designated areas where people can park them. So instead of having them in random areas and taking the picture, what you have is you take a picture, but it only can be parked, and then it could be geofenced. So therefore, people cannot end their rides
Yes.
unless they're in those areas.
Other cities have things like that, they call them bird nests.
Right.
When I rode back from the World Congress Center to City Hall, I noticed that City Hall is actually geofenced. You can't park next to City Hall, which I think is kind of lame that we don't let people do that in front of our house, but everyone else's house gets impacted. So I now know that you can geofence any way you want to.
You can geofence it any way you want to, and that way, if you do that, then you might avoid having all of them along these really narrow sidewalks.
Yeah, it's City Hall and hospitals that are all
Right.
geofenced. Kathy, and then we'll loop that way.
So
And then we'll come back to your non-scooter question at some point.
So I think, so the next round of legislation, you tighten up on scooters, but also those bikes.
Yeah.
Like those red bikes now are all over my neighborhood. And I think they also need to look at, even when they try to be nice and put them in that strip of grass between the sidewalk and they park, my neighborhood, there's not much parking, off-street parking. So if they park there, which they have, you can't park there because you can't get out of your car. So I think they just need to kind of look at that also, because I'm sure there's gonna be another round of rules.
Okay.
Well, with you being on the transportation committee, and then I see, like, I was looking forward to, West Peachtree or Juniper or Spring Street having, some bike lane, because when you're heading north to south, there's nowhere to go. Like, I don't wanna ride my bike, I don't wanna ride a scooter anywhere that's on those routes.
Yeah.
And then I go up Peachtree and people are like, okay, well, you can just ride the scooter on the street, and then that's not really practical, too fast. And our solution was to take care of people that are in cars, because they're running into telephone poles. And where do we put the telephone poles? In the middle of the
10 feet back.
sidewalk.
Yeah.
No, they're in the sidewalk. And so, like, there's nowhere for, I like having scooters, but they're not being, that situation is not being taken care of. Like the sidewalk's too small now, it's smaller than it was before.
No one's
and-
enforcing that, they're not supposed to be on the sidewalk, but no one enforces
Yeah, but
it.
you can't even walk, you can't even walk down there if you're, I see people with
Like, they're all on the
line sticks
sidewalk.
and they're running into telephone poles now, because we could have, I don't know, it seemed kind of crazy.
I rarely pass the buck, but I will hit the state for being stupid
Yeah.
enough to do that.
No
with
doubt.
Telephone poles.
Wow.
That's the State Street,
Yeah,
so the
unfortunately.
state can do what they want to do.
Don't we know it?
People talk all the time about tightening up on the scooters, but realistically, what can be done? I mean, they're all over the sidewalks, as we know.
Yep.
You put them in the streets, and they're definitely people are gonna get hurt because no helmets and all that. So what realistic solutions is anyone talking about?
Yeah, so we can do anything we want. I mean, they're not allowed in Athens, Georgia, and Decatur. You literally can't ride a scooter anywhere.
It's geofenced
I think that's
indicator.
too extreme. I think the number of them needs to come down. I would like to try and figure out if it's possible to, if the picture that people take at the end of a ride can actually mean something, and you have to show this is where this scooter is and it's not blocking anyone's way, I think that is progress. There's a piece of it, when people ride 12 miles an hour down a sidewalk and they're pedestrians, I don't know how you solve for that, right? I don't know how you solve for people needing to be better shares of space. Though I will point out that we're also pretty crappy to each other in our cars, and we do the same stuff, it's just we're surrounded by metal, so we're a little safer. But people, I don't know how to legislate the personal responsibility aspect of people needing to just share a sidewalk, or not be on a sidewalk, but responsibly share a space. Yeah.
So cops couldn't.
A solution is enforcement. You see APD officers stand and look at somebody on the
That's
sidewalk.
fair.
never
Now,
even
crack down
seen
on the sidewalk.
They don't
Yeah.
say anything to them, they don't do anything.
I mean, I never even see any cops anywhere.
Put some big cops on the sidewalks,
They're all at Piedmont Park right now.
Take that for 2 weeks.
I would certainly cut down.
Or during the festivals.
And also create a lane somewhere long-term as you're doing the complete streets. Long-term solution is to create a lane for bicycles, a lane for scooters, and a place for people to walk.
We don't have enough bike lanes, I mean, just put a bike lane somewhere.
Yeah, just a bike lane.
There's no north-south bike lanes, there's not a one.
Right.
Buckhead doesn't want them.
Education piece of the ordinance. So we have a lot of visitors in Midtown.
Yeah.
How do they know? How do they know not to go on the sidewalk? 'Cause
It's not posted.
it's not posted. Should maybe
And it's
something
not
on.
enforced, so,
It's not
yeah.
enforced, but if the person
Should be a
knows
list
it's
of
not
rules
posted,
right on the
it's not
handlebars.
sidewalk.
Should be on the scooter
It should be on the scooter itself.
Yeah.
An
Right.
educational campaign
That's a good
doesn't
idea.
work because
When you rent the scooter the first time, you go through and check, you agree to not ride it on the sidewalk.
You're not reading.
Wear a helmet, there's like 10 things you agree to.
And that you're 18.
Which everybody immediately ignores all 10.
Right, well, they don't read them.
Right, so, but if you had a designated space for it that says scooters here with pylons,
Yeah,
with
well,
people
that's-
being able to do that, and you can look at where you can lay them out quickly in places, so you may not have to pay the same amount of money for the complete street. That may make some sense.
John's had his hand up for.
I have just a very technical question.
Okay.
Why are they allowed the belt line? Was that part of your January legislation? Because I remember Michael Julian Bond saying to us,
Yeah.
they're motorized vehicles, and it may be an electric motor, but belt line is no motorized vehicles.
Yep.
So like, I don't understand why they're allowed to be there.
Yep.
Yeah, they shouldn't.
Not
I
a
agree.
cop out, but just a statement of fact. I joined the transportation committee the day after that meeting. I voted on this legislation. I wasn't part of the conversation around kind of drafting it. I think that's a decision that was made that none of us decided to take out when it came to the full council, and it is, I'm actually pretty sympathetic to that. I think that probably should be part of the July conversation. As we review everything else, how many of them are there? How do we try and do these things better? The Beltline probably needs to be
You
in place.
can legislate all you want.
I know.
But it all comes down to enforcement.
It does.
And then after enforcement, it comes down to, the workload that's on the APD.
Yeah.
I mean, so.
At a time when there are X hundred officers short.
It's not gonna get done.
Yeah.
Just the reality is it's not gonna get done.
Well, if the legislation changes, it's there, and as we beef up, and when there are
Law is the
egregious
first step, and
violations,
enforcement's the
some
second.
tickets can be issued, and we could try and enroll the companies to help.
And charge them more.
Yeah.
Yes, a lot
John,
more.
that's gonna help, I'd like to change the discussion from
Oh.
scooters to more of a futuristic.
Can I just add one
Oh,
piece
sure.
before you do that? To John's point, it's a public health and safety, it goes beyond, space sharing when you're on a belt line or in your park. CDC is running studies on this and the devastating public impact on someone's health, killing, death,
Yep.
maiming. It's way beyond a bicycle or a walking pedestrian, so I think the city has an obligation for public health and safety to actually review the scientific evidence about what happens putting scooters in certain locations. You do, because that's one of your charges, public safety.
Yep. Noted.
Look for the scientific studies.
Ask
The belt
Abby.
line is one giant pub crawl, if you were to go there today, anyway. It is.
And it's fun, it's a great place.
You've got people, like, I mean, I've
Zoom in.
spent time in Canada. You can't ride your bike after you've had a beer in Canada. You'll get arrested, right? I mean, people come out of New Realm and then they're drunk riding scooters. And it's hard enough because you have dogs, you've got people that are walking like 7 across,
Babies.
you've got bikes. It's a mess. And it's great that like the Beltline became what it became.
Yeah.
But like, it's, now it's just, you know, I don't vote anymore.
I get it.
You can go on
Weekdays, yeah, Wednesdays, morning, yeah.
Okay, let's do shift. Debbie wants to look into the future.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
First of all, I commend you for joining the Transportation Committee, living in Atlanta and growing up in Atlanta. And also for increasing the wages of the policemen. 2 questions. I'll make the first one easy.
Okay.
In the future, is there a plan to turn any of our one-way streets into two-way streets?
Yeah.
I remember talking to Tim King years ago about that, and
Yeah.
kind of the answer was there's just no plan right now. So, not to diss him, I think
Yeah.
it's great. And
Yeah.
also, is there a campaign, I might have missed it in taking the notes, to increase the force? Not just to increase the
Okay.
the force, but how are you gonna do it? Are you putting out a campaign to get more staff? Because everything we've talked about here
Comes back to
is,
the police.
yeah, comes back to,
It's true.
well,
Sounds
people
like-
respecting other people, and then the policemen are having enough policemen to get the tickets, and then third, sorry,
Hmm.
it occurred to me that even if that happens, and even if someone gets a citation, are we actually getting any money on that? And are the fines high enough to discourage anybody from doing it again?
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's fine.
Three questions.
I got you. I think I got them all. So it probably was true that back when you had an initial conversation with Tim, if it was in 2015 or 2016,
Yeah.
there wasn't a comprehensive
Right, and that-
two-way, one-way thing.
Yeah,
The downtown master plan for Central Atlanta Progress oversees downtown,
Mhm.
right? Midtown Alliance oversees Midtown. Both their leaders, AJ and Kevin, are big proponents of
okay.
this, right?
So it's in the works?
I share the belief that it is better to have two-way streets than one-way streets. I think one-way streets invite people to drive as fast as humanly possible on their way to get to the interstate. And I think that two-way streets are intentionally slow down traffic. If we're gonna have a vibrant downtown one day, like we are beginning to see increasingly vibrant midtown, I think that's an important piece of the conversation. There's a cost associated with them. I think the downtown master plan called for like